in the jar and use thin lines. The Akua Carborundum Gel can be used for many printmaking techniques. My all-time favorite is the dark field because it has a feel like a Mezzotype but also a Mezzotype. So it's a nice combination for me to work with. To start, I want to create a dark field by squeegeeing the Akua Carborundum onto an Akua plate. I'm going to place the plate on my template just as if I were screen printing ink. I want to make sure I have plenty of the Carborundum Gel on my plate so I can squeegee from start to finish, and I can always put back what's left over in the jar and use it a later time. It's that simple. Once I squeegee my plate, I remove it and it's ready to be worked. Before I abandon my screen, I'm going to clean up just enough so I don't ruin my mesh and my squeegee, and I'll clean up more thoroughly later. I want as much time as I can to work while the Carborundum Gel is still wet on the plate. So I'm going to use a tray to temporarily prevent it from clogging so I can clean it up easily now and then more thoroughly later. Okay, so everything else could sit. So, first thing I want to do is place my plate on top of my template. While it's still wet, it has a really nice workable stage where I can kind of use rags and get some nice plate tone and remove large areas. So what I'm doing is I'm removing areas that will be the lightest or the white of the paper coming through. So it's a very nice fluid, very much like how I work with Mezzotype. Q-tips are really nice for cleaning up areas of the plate that I want the paper to come through. So that would be my whites or my very light plate tones. I'm saving the really sharp lines for when the plate dries. Once it gets a little tacky, after about 10 minutes, I may go in and scrape with wooden sticks, which may be similar to using ceramic type tools. So you can use a variation of tools, pointed. Will give you fine lines. Once it's dry, you have forever to work on. You have about 20 minutes to work on the plate while it's still wet and tacky. All right, I'm going to take a little peep to see exactly what I have. Looking good. Now I want some sharp detail, so I'm going to wait for it to dry so I can do the underside of the mushroom and capture those linear marks. So now that my plate is thoroughly dry after about a half an hour, I'm going to go in with my ball burnisher stylus tools. These can give me some really sharp lines, and they come in a variety of ball burnishing sizes. This one's a little wider, and I can scrape wide lines. These will be nice and sharp lines. And down to some very fine tools that can give you really thin lines. I also like the large burnisher. I am being careful that I don't scrape into the plate. That would scratch the plate and give a dry point effect, which could be nice. You could do that if that's what you're after. But the purpose of my wiping away the Carborundum dry gel is to create a white line, not a black line. You notice there are some dried carborundum pieces on the surface. With a soft brush, they can easily be wiped away. So I think this is just about ready to print. I want to make sure it's clean of all residue particles. And check it before it goes to the press. Nice. So I have my very soft marks that I worked with when it was still wet. And then I have my sharper lines when it was dry. I made 2 plates so I can show you the difference, how to ink the plate for printing by hand and for printing with an etching press. In order to keep the plates from moving on the glass slab while I'm inking, I'm going to add a little bit of water. I'm going to print this one in a similar way that you would print any intaglio plate. There's a few differences that I'm going to point out. I'm going to take the Akua intaglio ink and I'll be using a brayer to apply the ink. I want to use the brayer instead of a card or a plastic scraper. This will keep the plate from losing some of the carborundum, and I'm pressing very firmly so that the ink goes into the grooves of the carborundum. Once I have the ink covered, I'm going to give it one last smooth application across the plate, and now it's ready to be wiped. I'm going to use the Akua wiping fabric. The Akua wiping fabric is softer and smoother than traditional tarlatan. For better visibility, I'm going to turn on my light table so I can see what's going on. So now that it's inked up, I can get a better vision of what's actually on my plate. Now I see there's some darker areas that I would like to lighten up with my ball burnisher. So I'm going to go in and draw. I'm going to go in and draw some more lines just to soften up some of the really dark areas before I go to print. So this is one way you can proof your plate before you print it. You don't need to waste paper, or you don't need to print it to see exactly what you're going to get. You can see the difference how it looks with the light table on. Now I'm going to get ready to ink up the plate for the pin press. So to make up for having less pressure, I'm going to have more ink. And when I go to print this one, I'm going to use more of a Mezzotype style, leaving more ink on the surface of the plate and more areas selectively wiped away with Q-tips, and also the wiping fabric. Okay. One thing when you're printing with the pin press, you want the ink to be really nice and loose so it falls off the knife. If the ink is too stiff, you can always add a little bit of the Akua blending medium and it'll thin it out. But it's perfect just the way it is right now. So I'm going to ink it up in the same manner I would any other plate with the brayer. And once I get the ink on, I'm going to smooth it out so I have equal application over the entire plate. And with the light source, I'll be able to see my image a little more clearly. You want to make sure that your wiping fabric is really inky, and with gentle motions, wipe it and reveal the image. Once you see the image, focus a little more on that area. And now I'm going to go over it again with the roller, but very thin, light rolls, just to smooth out the ink. Okay, now I'm going to go in just like I would if I were doing a monotype and reveal the image. Okay, I think it's ready to be printed. So, because the water underneath is sucking down the plate, I'm going to lift it with a palette knife, remove it, and it feels a little dry, so I'm going to add a little more water here to hold it down in place again. And I want to make sure the table area is dry. I also pre-soaked my paper, and I'm printing with Arnhem 1618, and it has a slightly textured side and a very smooth side. I want to make sure I use the very smooth side. So this is the one that was printed with the pin press, and this is the print that was printed with the etching press. And the overall difference between the two is basically the pin press gives you an impression that's softer and more textured, whereas the etching press print has a sharper look to it. In comparison to the Carborundum Gel, this area I was working while the Carborundum was still wet, and in this area the Carborundum Gel was dry. So you can see the sharper lines and the softer plate tones. This is just one way the Akua Carborundum Gel could be used, and we will be posting more videos with more ways.